Welcome back to another episode of You're All Doomed, where we slice and shish kebab our way through Friday the 13th Part 2, 13 minutes at a time. I'm your host, Brian.
I'm grunting man-child Greg.
This episode begins with pillow-cased or potato-sacked Jason popping out from underneath the bedsheets and ends with a surprise appearance by Mrs. Voorhees. So when we last left Jason, he was popping out of the bed and scaring the living shit out of Vicky.
Yeah, she screams like a banshee. She's so scared. She
starts backing up, and Jason's coming at her, and not particularly quickly, but he slashes at her leg, and as she's stumbling backwards, she turns around and sees Jeff hanging from a bedsheet. My first question is, why? Because we already know that he got speared along with Sandra in bed, so that means Jason unhooked them and then hung Jeff up on a bedsheet.
Yeah, maybe because Jason knew he wanted to hide in the bed, so he had to move at least one of the bodies to make room for himself. And he couldn't just have Jeff strewn on the floor, because then as soon as anyone opened the door, they would see the dead body there and know something was up and run away. Maybe Jason has a little plan to try and back Vicky into the corner so that she sees the corpse of her friend hanging there from a shirt hook. It's pretty grisly, but you're right. It's the first time we're seeing Jason kind of exhibiting any theatricality, unless you count putting his mother's head in a refrigerator.
True. Yeah. So I guess there is a pattern of behavior here, so it's not too uncharacteristic of him. As he has Vicky cornered, I noticed that Jason has a blood blister under his thumbnail.
Yeah, I have a little running damage report of Jason's injuries in the next couple of segments, and that was the first one, that he obviously slammed his thumb in the door after impaling Jeff and Sandra. So I don't know if that was a stunt mishap on the set or what happened there, but
yeah, the blood blister is also known as a subungual hematoma. It's a collection of blood in the space between the nail bed and the fingernail or the toenail. There's some possible causes for this. You could slam your finger in a car door or a house door, which is something that Jason absolutely could have done. You could also hit your finger with a heavy object such as a hammer. He's constantly wielding some sort of heavy weapon, so it's entirely possible. Ice and elevation are the recommended treatments for minor subungual hematomas. If the hematoma involves more than 50% of the area of the nail, you should probably seek medical attention. Now, I don't see Jason going to the ER and being like, hey, I got this thing. But Jason's, covers at least 60% of his thumbnails, so he probably should see a doctor, but I just don't see him as being the responsible type in doing that.
But I wonder if Steve Dash, the stuntman, did.
Potentially. And one common remedy is for the doctor to use something called electrocautery, which is a hot wire that they use to puncture the nail until the blood below is released. So that sounds kind of revolting, but it's one way.
That would have been a horrifying scene right there.
Yeah,
Jesus.
Especially if Jason was doing it to himself. A little self-administered.
Like that scene in Rambo 3 where he cauterizes
right.
his own wound. Ugh.
Yeah, so I thought you'd like to know that.
Yikes. Vicky's death is considered among the creepiest in the entire series. I've seen this brought up in several places, because she sees it coming for 15 full seconds. Jason marches toward her, knife in the air. She knows she can't get away. She's paralyzed with fear, and right up until the moment it plunges into her body, she's just assuming the worst. And there's some good acting there, I think, by Lauren Marie Taylor. She really sells it. It's hard to tell exactly where she gets stabbed.
Yeah, it's very unclear how she even dies.
Mm-hmm. And it's unclear as to why there's blood on her lip immediately after the knife plunges in, her lower torso, presumably.
Yeah, it's another awkward camera angle, because he raises the knife up, but then she gets slashed down in the belly.
Mm-hmm.
At least that's what it looks like. I should also point out that he's using a butcher knife. He's kind of going through the gamut of weapons here. The machete is still embedded in Mark's face, and the spear is probably still stuck in Sandra. We know it's Jeff has been removed, but he's having to rely on different weapons, and so he's being pretty resourceful.
Yeah, he's improvising for sure. Lauren Marie Taylor had a credit for being on Ryan's Hope, just like Deputy Winslow. She apparently voiced a character on the Pound Puppies cartoon. Not a ton after that, but she's happily married with 3 kids. So we say farewell to her. Paul and Ginny arrive back in the torrential downpour, and we get a quick insert shot of, again, heavily breathing Jason dragging Vicky's body downstairs. I'm not sure why.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of the questionable actions of Jason are starting to pile up a little bit here. I don't know if he's trying to cover his tracks or... I mean, he's not being particularly sneaky, and if his plan is to kill everyone he comes across anyway, then what difference does it make if his tracks aren't covered? So the moving of the bodies is a little bizarre.
Yeah, I mean, if he's got some grand plan that he's staging a scene or something, he's not going about it with a whole lot of focus. And in fact, we never find out what happens to Vicky's body, so we don't even know where he dragged it. It's kind of a curious little insert shot. Jenny and Paul enter, and they're immediately alarmed that the lights are off and nobody's around. So they do the typical horror movie thing of kind of wandering around calling people's names and searching rooms. They go upstairs and find that Jeff and Sandra's bed is thoroughly slathered in a pool of blood, which you would expect, but that means that Jason was probably lying in this bloody bed.
Which means his back is covered in blood.
Which means his bag is covered in blood. I do like the moment where Ginny and Paul, wonder, is this a joke? And it's kind of rightly dismissed, like no one would do this. That was a moment from the first movie where we were kind of, puzzled why, with the axe in the bed, is it a joke? Blah blah blah. And I like that the characters bring that up here and immediately discard it. So we know Paul and Ginny are taking this seriously, and they know something's up.
They head back downstairs, and it's very dark, and you can't really see what's going on. But Ginny has this moment where she just kind of pauses for a second, and I don't know if she sees something or she senses something.
She's got spider sense or what?
Yeah, but she just kind of says out loud, she goes, "Paul, there's someone in this room." And then all of a sudden we see this shadow of this like sack-headed, spear-wielding man kind of rise up from the corner of the room and kind of come towards Paul. And Ginny just lets out, "Paul, there's someone in the fucking room." And I have always loved that line. It's a character, like most movies would have someone like freaking out and screaming and just not being able to rationalize what's going on. But like Ginny's showing that she's a really strong character, and she's freaking out, but she's not losing control, and she's making an observation, and she's trying to warn Paul. And I just think it's such a great moment.
Yeah, Amy Steele really nails that delivery. It's super convincing. It's super chilling. I can totally see myself reacting that way in that situation. So yeah, that's a top-notch moment.
Yeah, I mean, put yourself in her shoes for a second. Her adorable shoes, of walking into a room and sensing that someone else was in it. I'd be like, "See ya," and I turn around and I leave. And she's like, "Paul, there's someone in this room. Paul, there is someone in this fucking room." And I don't know. I love that moment.
Yep. Paul and Jason get into a pretty brutal wrestle fight. They're thrashing around the room in the dark, and only Jason stands up. So yet again, we get a pretty good reveal of Jason in this darkened room with a sack over his head, and that causes Ginny to freak out, and she flees into another room. And the chase is now on. It's going to be Jason chasing down Ginny for a pretty big chunk of this movie, and we get into some really great stuff. Ginny is locked in one room and Jason smashes through the outside window to grab her, but she manages to get away, so it leaves his hand clawing at the empty air in the window. So for the Jason damage report, we see that he's now all cut up from the window glass. So aside from his wounded thumb, now his whole hand is slashed up from the window.
Yeah, and then she goes to hide in the kitchen, and now she's armed with a knife. And Jason is just pissed at this point, and he busts through the door, and he's got a pitchfork now.
He busts through the door with a fucking pitchfork.
He's got an arsenal, apparently, just at the ready. But he's got a pitchfork, and Ginny opens the kitchen pantry, and who falls out? Crazy Ralph, which I thought was funny, and I don't know if it was deliberate, but the very first time that we saw Crazy Ralph at Camp Crystal Lake, he was hiding in a pantry in part 1. And the very last time we see him, he's falling out of a pantry in part 2. So it's a nice little bookended poetry for Crazy Ralph.
Yeah, Ralph has come full circle with the pantries. I mean, the fact that Jason managed to bash through that door with the points of a pitchfork, I mean, that's just furious strength. It's one thing to chop through with a heavy axe or something, but to basically poke through a door, the fury that he is unleashed. So yes, I just said furious and fast, and it's great. It's super scary, and it horrifies Ginny that he's coming after her with this thing.
And the chase continues, and Jenny makes a break for it out the kitchen window, and she runs to her car, and of course it doesn't start. That was established earlier on that the car was troublesome. But the coolest part about this is Jason climbs onto the roof of her convertible and rips through it with his pitchfork and starts stabbing down at her.
Yeah.
And Ginny manages to knock Jason down by opening up the passenger side door, which I thought was pretty cool.
That was great. I mean, I also want to take a moment to just commend her again on her panic acting when he punctures the roof. It was scary enough when he popped up in the driver's side window and tried to, jimmy his way into the car door. But then when he punctures through the roof, I got the sense that Amy Steele was actually freaking the fuck out.
Right, like she wasn't expecting that to happen.
Yeah, because she was it was almost like a laugh scream. She was like, what the fuck?
Yeah.
Like she was so scared. It was great. But yeah, then the damage report here, Ginny boots the door open, knocking Jason's ass onto the ground. And, he hits hard.
Yeah.
Seems to have a tough time getting back up. So he's kind of getting his ass kicked a little bit. Mm-hmm. It's also interesting that in some of these shots, I'm presuming that Steve Dash is playing Jason in these kind of stunt-based scenes. That's sort of the gist I get from the controversy, which we'll discuss a little bit later. But some of these shots make him look kind of small, and he's a relatively small guy for the people who have played Jason so far. He's only 5'10", but there's something about the way these shots are framed that make him look not puny, because he looks strong and sturdy, but almost like kind of a shrunken man. And I'm sure that if I met the late Steve Dash in person, he would be imposing and whatever. I'm not casting aspersions on his toughness, but it's more about the cinematography and just how they kind of make Jason look like a stunted person. It's kind of creepy. When he rolls around on the ground a little bit, there's just something unsettling about his stature.
Yeah, but after Ginny knocks Jason down, she makes arguably her first questionable decision of this movie. She runs about maybe 20 feet into the woods and hides behind a bush. She's not far from the car at all. She can still see the car and Jason laying on the ground. And, of course, Jason immediately finds her, which results in a pretty awesome knee to the nuts. And Jason goes down again. Yeah,
you say it's questionable. I say it pays off beautifully because she rails him in the balls. And he grunts in pain. He just, he takes it in the sack.
And to defend her actions here, she may have thought that Jason was down for the count and was simply just hiding there to make sure, and then was going to wait it out for a minute or two, and also to probably catch her breath. And so when Jason comes up quickly, I just love her reaction of like, well, I'm just going to knee him in the nuts because that's going to take down any dude.
Kaboosh. But then, then her questionable decisions continue as she kind of runs off into the woods at random, and is kind of going along a path when out of nowhere Jason attempts a flying tackle, but he misses and does a face plant into the dirt. So yet again, he's gone down. He's on the ground.
Now the pillowcase is getting dirty.
Now the pillowcase is getting dirty. Then we have kind of a weird pursuit montage, where we kind of cut back to shots of the moon and Ginny running and then Jason running and then the moon again. And it's just kind of a strange...
I got the impression that it's supposed to indicate the passage of time, that this chase was going on for a while, but showing a full chase in the dark in the woods is not particularly exciting. So you just want to show, okay, they run for a while and we're going to do this by this weird... It's a montage. It's just cutting back and forth, and you see Ginny and you see Jason and you see the moon, and it's back and forth. There's kind of like this weird kind of like spooky atmospheric movie or music playing. It's a little strange, and it takes a little bit of the tension out of it because you don't have that sense of immediacy anymore. It's
we don't know how far apart they are from each other.
Yeah, it's just back and forth shots.
Yeah, I mean, I agree that it's more effective than some of the shots in the first movie of people wandering around in the dark and you can't even tell where they are. But it was just odd. And then the fact that kind of randomly Ginny ends up back in a cabin. Did she go in a big circle?
Well, yeah, that's what's bizarre. Like, if it is supposed to cover, a large period of time where she was being chased, then why is she back in a cabin again, which, presumably was right across the path from where she was before.
So Jason enters the cabin, and Ginny is hiding under the bed. There was a moment, even watching it this time, I always think that Jason is going to lay down for a second. I feel like that's why they're establishing the bed. But he prowls around the room a little bit.
And then out of nowhere, this rat kind of runs across the floor of the cabin, and it goes right by Ginny's face. And
it like sniffs her hand.
Yeah, and I think it grosses her out more than anything. And so she's just trying not to like whimper or shoo it away. And she's just trying to be still and quiet. And then we don't see the rat anymore, and we kind of see Ginny hiding under the bed, but all of a sudden we see this puddle of pee kind of stream out from underneath the bed. And it's not entirely clear if it's Ginny peeing her pants out of fear or if it's the rat. It seems like a lot of pee for a rat, but I'm inclined to believe that it is the rat because the way Ginny's positioned under the bed where the pee is coming out doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
Yeah, although right before you see the pee, Ginny does kind of a little wince, like a strain. And yes, that might be her trying to hold in any sort of verbal reaction to the rat, but the way it's edited, it makes it seem like she just can't hold it anymore. But then you're right, it's such a flood of pee that you would think that a lot of that would have been soaked up by her clothes and wouldn't be this flowing puddle onto the floor.
Yeah, this was a free-flowing stream that was trickling out from under the bed, enough so that Jason sees it.
Yeah, Jason kind of turns and out of the corner of his eye sees this, which was a spooky reaction, but I don't get what they were going for there.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's just something to draw Jason's attention to under the bed, but it's very ambiguous. And I think Ginny's concerned, whether it was her or the rat that peed, I think she's concerned that Jason saw it, and so she kind of stays as still as possible and stays under the bed until she thinks it's safe, and she thinks Jason's gone.
She hears the door and thinks that Jason's left.
Yeah, and she's like, okay, this is my time to make a break for it.
But instead, as she slides out from under the bed, she looks up and she sees that Jason is perched on a chair, which then randomly collapses, spilling him to the floor yet again, hard enough that it actually breaks his pitchfork. So you figure that the handle probably hit him in the sternum and the points hit the floor and cracked the shaft. That had to hurt.
I would imagine, yeah.
Ginny darts into the adjacent room, which is apparently the utility shed as well, because she's able to grab the chainsaw. So, feet from where people sleep is also, gas-powered motorized bladed tools, which is kind of interesting.
This is Chekhov's gun in action here. If you're going to introduce a chainsaw in the first act, you better fire that sucker up in the third act.
Yeah, I feel like we're getting overlapping Chekhov's guns. We've got the unreliable car, we've got the chainsaw.
Yep.
But she fires that bad boy up and goes after Jason. And I think Jason's arm takes a hit from the chainsaw before it stalls.
Absolutely.
She doesn't have that thing going long.
Yeah, she grazes him.
Yeah, it looks like
he goes down.
He's carved up a little bit. So then he falls down again. She drops the chainsaw and bashes Jason in the back with a chair.
Which is great.
Hard.
Just for a good measure. Hey, while you're down, I'm going to hit you again.
Yeah, I mean, she just smacks the shit out of him with that thing. And she takes that opportunity to, yet again, randomly dash off into the woods. And just so happens to stumble upon Jason's shack.
Yeah, and much like, at least Deputy Winslow had a reason to enter the shack. He was chasing somebody and thought that person might be in there. Ginny goes inside looking for help.
Yeah, she's calling out for help.
That's the last place in the world I would go into and expect help.
Why would she think anyone would be there? And whoever is there, why would she want them to help her?
I think she regrets her decision the second she goes in there, because she kind of runs in and closes the door behind her, and she's catching her breath and she's looking around, and she probably sees the high chair in the corner, and she's like, oh my God, what have I done? I shouldn't have done this.
Made a horrible mistake.
And we get this kick-ass shot of Jason barreling down the trail in the woods. You see him through the window and you just see him getting closer and closer. And the best part is you see him a lot longer than I remembered. I thought he only popped up at the last second, oh my God, look, there's Jason in the window. But you see him running through the woods, and it takes him a good 4 or 5 seconds to get close enough where Ginny reacts. And it's so awesome to just see him kind of lumbering through the woods, I'm going to get you, here I come.
Yeah.
And then when Ginny does see them, she just, she freaks out.
There was a little bit of a blooper when she approaches the shack. In the background, you can actually see another building lit up. I don't know if that's just because of widescreen or something, but that was a little bit of a shame. It kind of ruined a little bit of the effect that, there's an illuminated building not too far from where she is, but that's probably just a set gaffe. But yeah, like you say, the rest of what's going on is so creepy that it doesn't really undermine the scene too badly.
So once she sees Jason, she decides to barricade herself in this, looks like a nice candlelit room. And I'm starting to think that this might be the room that Deputy Winslow walked in and kind of freaked out by when he saw it. But she runs in and she's like, okay, I'm just going to barricade myself in here. And then she starts looking around.
Yeah.
And it turns out it's a shrine to Mrs. Voorhees.
Yeah, she turns around and she sees the altar surrounded by the corpses of the dead cop, Terry, who looks remarkably undamaged. We're still not sure how she died. And then something I'd never noticed before that was a fantastic detail. There's a completely decayed skeleton on the floor with an ice pick in its head.
Right.
It's Alice's corpse.
I never noticed that too.
Fantastic.
So yeah, it's an odd collection. Deputy Winslow makes sense. He was killed there. Terry, we don't know exactly where she died. But again, why would he bring her back there? And Alice, there's definitely some significance to having her next to the shrine.
Right.
But the Terry one is a little bizarre. But hey, Jason's got his motives, and if it makes him happy, it makes him happy.
Maybe that's where he was planning to take Vicky's body, but he didn't have time. He had plenty of time to bring Terry back. Maybe Scott is behind the altar. We just can't see him, or he's underneath someone or something. Maybe this is sort of a collection of sacrifices to his mother's head.
It could also just be a very kind of slow and deliberate attempt to really cover his tracks. Maybe he's not being as careless as we think. And, he knows that there's this legend. He might know that there's this legend about him and that people are, potentially out there looking for him. And maybe he just doesn't want there to be any evidence, not any, significant evidence. Obviously, if you got a blood-stained bed, but if you take the body away, then,
right. No one knows exactly whatever happened. That could be.
So maybe he's just slowly trying to, stockpile all of his kills. Although getting Mark is going to be a real pain in the ass.
Well, maybe not. He can just wheel him over there. I like that Pamela's head is resting on the table like the idol of fertility from Raiders of the Lost Ark. And her sweater is draped underneath her. And then I noticed that her pants are actually there, too. So it's
I
sort
didn't
of
see
like
her pants.
he's kind of recreated her body in a sense. That's another nice little detail.
Ginny is now, barricaded herself into this room, and Jason's trying to break his way in.
With a pickaxe.
Yeah. And he's not messing around. He's really trying to get into the room. And so Ginny's kind of looking around, and she starts to realize what she's surrounded by. She realizes that this is a shrine, and she sees Mrs. Voorhees' head, but she also sees the famous blue cable knit sweater that Mrs. Voorhees used to wear. And you can see like the wheels starting to spin, and she's, starting to think of something. She also notices that there's a machete lying right next to the head, and this is the one that we can probably presume is the very machete that Alice used to decapitate Mrs. Voorhees 5 years ago. And for whatever reason, Jason wants to keep it as a memento. But Ginny sees all these things and starts to formulate a plan.
Yeah, she puts her child psychology background to work here, and as you say, you can see her, her wheels turning as she comes up with a plan to disguise herself as Jason's mother after a fashion. And so she puts on the blue sweater. It's pretty shabby at this point, pretty dirty, and probably really gross, caked with blood, and just, it's an unpleasant thing to be putting over your head for sure. But she puts it on, and I love that there's a little moment where she kind of fixes her hair. She leans down to the severed head and tries to fix her hair to look a little bit more like Mrs. Voorhees. And just in time, because Jason manages to bash his way into the room, and he's startled to see what appears to be his mother standing before him.
Yeah, he's really confused and kind of taken aback by it. He goes charging in, preparing to just, wreak havoc, and then he's like, wait, what? And he's a confused little boy.
Yeah, and so Ginny's theories in the bar were hit the nail on the head, so good for her. And she really leans into it. She starts speaking to him as though she's his mother, and even scolds him at one point. Jason, mother is talking to you. And we can see from Jason's perspective kind of a wavering image of Betsy Palmer playing Mrs. Voorhees superimposed on Amy Steele. And kind of we see from Jason's perspective him tricked into thinking that he's witnessing his mother's resurrection.
Yeah, it's emphasizing his confusion where he's like, I know it's not my mom and this is another woman, but they kind of look the same. What's going on here? And they all start to kind of form together. And that's when he's like, he realizes wait, maybe this is my mother.
Yeah. And they actually got Betsy Palmer to come in for a quick shoot to do, they put her in a black turtleneck against a black background and lit her face and had her do some quick line readings. So she reprised her role as Pamela Voorhees for a little while, which was kind of cool. It was a nice effect.
As Jason is in Ginny's spell, this is where she starts, using that psychology. And she said, "It's all done, Jason. You've done your job well, and Mommy is pleased." And this is where Jason really starts to lower his defenses, and he actually lowers his pickaxe, and you can see him kind of just submitting to his mother, and Ginny's praising him like, "That's a good boy. Now come to Mommy." And she's kind of beckoning him to get closer, and meanwhile she's holding the machete behind her back, and we continue to see that merging of the face of Mrs. Voorhees and Ginny, and Jason's just kind of tilting his head in confusion, and that's where we leave off.
Yeah, there's some nice under the bag acting there. Again, I think that's Steve Dash, and the little head tilt is good, and just a good sense of confusion and submission, which can't be easy when you've got a bag over your head, and you're not necessarily a trained actor per se, but yeah. So that's a good place to wrap it up. One death this time, Vicky. Now that we have confirmation of Terry's death, we can pause for a moment to talk about the actress Kirsten Baker, who played her in this movie. She also looks like she Shot a couple of scenes for Jaws 2, but due to the complicated production history of that movie, her scenes were reshot, so she doesn't actually appear in the finished film, which is too bad because then she would have had a double header of two of my favorite sequels. But haven't seen her in much since then, but hope that she's doing well.
And she never got to learn the fate of her dog, Muffin.
Very true, very tragic.
I don't have anything else for this episode.
Nope, neither do I.
Cool. Well, then until next time, I've been Brian.
I've been Greg.
And you are all doomed.